My name is Jennifer Schull, and I would like to share with you my research project, Impact of Student Choice on Reading Motivation. Over the past several years, reading instruction in the classroom has become more about testing rather than instilling a love of reading for students. Many students do not read for enjoyment and only read for academic purposes. In his book, Redecide: How Schools Are Killing Reading and What You Can Do About It, Gallagher claims that funds are being used to purchase test prep materials and core reading programs and that fewer books are actually being read. He describes Redecide as the love of reading being killed by many teaching practices of today. He claims we have developed illiterates, people who can read but won't. Several factors can also negatively affect the struggling reader. For many struggling readers, the majority of their time is spent on workbooks and isolated skills instruction. They have fewer opportunities to actually read books of interest. Because of fewer opportunities to actually read, many struggling readers also experience fluency issues. Although many students enjoy Accelerated Reader, it can have a negative impact on reading motivation for many struggling readers. Many students feel embarrassed by color-coded books of lower reading levels. Also, because of more participation in worksheets, isolated skills instruction, and more pull-out for intervention, the struggling reader has fewer opportunities to participate in Accelerated Reader, thus receiving fewer points and fewer participation opportunities and rewards. The quantity of reading by a student often predicts school success and performance on standardized testing. For students to become better readers, they must be motivated and actively engaged in authentic reading. The purpose of this study was to identify factors that motivate students to participate in voluntary independent reading. The study investigated the impact of student choice on reading motivation and attitude. 3 sub-questions helped with the research. Number 1, what factors contributed to a decrease in students' reading motivation? Number 2, what additional components of reading instruction were provided for the students? And number 3, how did students feel about each additional component of reading instruction? A qualitative action research design was used in this study. This is used by educators to improve teaching practices, usually within their own classroom. The study took place in a Title I school in the southeastern United States. A convenient sampling of 18 second grade students was used because of the availability of the participants. 10 students were female, 8 students were male, 8 students were Caucasian, 9 were African American, and 1 participant was mixed race. No students received special education services, but 1 student did receive intervention through the school's student support team. 6 focus students were selected from the 18. They represented the struggling readers. 3 were female and 3 were male. At the beginning of the academic school year, standardized test scores revealed that 6 students were below average, 5 were average low, 6 were average high, and 1 scored above average. Data collection included short one-on-one interviews, teacher-student conferences, observations, anecdotal notes in the field journal, encoding, and themes. After IRB approval, parental permission forms and student consent forms were collected from participants. After proper forms were collected, research began to determine what factors, if any, motivated students to read. An initial interview was conducted to determine what students liked most about reading, what they liked least about reading, how they felt about reading at school, and how they felt about reading at home. After the initial interview, an independent reading time of 30 to 45 minutes daily was implemented. During this time, students were allowed more choice in the materials they read, who to read with, they were allowed choice of where to read, and they were also introduced to Epic, which was a website with thousands of books to choose from. During this time, the individual conferences were held with students, observations were recorded in a field journal, and book clubs met during small group instruction. This instruction took place for 6 weeks. Afterwards, a final interview was conducted to determine if motivation or reading attitudes changed. At the end, the triangulation of data from the conferences, interviews, and observations were utilized. To analyze results, 3 sub-questions assisted with the main research focus. The first question, what factors contributed to a decrease in reading motivation, concluded that books that were too difficult, repeated readings, reading the same text as everyone else, and worksheets or workbooks all contributed to a decrease in reading motivation. Students also reported not having enough books to choose from, especially at home, as another factor that decreased reading motivation. The second question, what additional components of reading instruction was provided for the students? Additional components included a choice of reading material in the classroom, choice of read to self or read to someone, a choice of reading partners, and a choice of where to read. Choosing book clubs was also an option for students. Book clubs were utilized during small group instruction. Students chose groups or clubs based on interest rather than ability. The original intent was to give students pre-selected options. However, many students began forming groups on their own based on the availability of multiple copies in the classroom. Epic was also introduced. This is an online website that provides thousands of books for students to read. This is a great option when limited funds and space are available. Accelerated Reader, which was already utilized some, was another option for students. Question number 3, how did students feel about each additional component of reading instruction? 3 themes developed during the study to assist with this question. Theme 1, student choice. Students enjoyed choosing their own reading material the most. The number 1 choice was Epic. They liked this because they said they had so many more books to choose from than the library or the classroom. Choosing who to read with was also very important to the students. They enjoyed reading with partners. Choosing where in the room to read was also important to the students. Students did not enjoy reading at their desk, but preferred reading at pillows in the corners and on bean bags. Reading volume was theme 2. Reading volume increased tremendously. It was obvious from the Epic website. Students had read 643 books and a total of 130 hours of reading collectively during the 6 weeks. Accelerated Reader was also used. It was interesting to note that students preferred Epic over Accelerated Reader, although some students chose both. One reason that I was told that they chose Epic was because they didn't have to take a test, they could just read. The third thing that developed was reading behavior. Reading stamina improved, with most students staying engaged for the full 30 to 45 minutes. Students were not afraid to try new genres of books and enjoyed making reading recommendations to their friends. Students were also aware of an increase in their reading fluency and accuracy as they recorded in their data journals. Students began taking risks, trying harder books, and attempting to pronounce unfamiliar words. The focused students could still not stay engaged as long, however, their stamina also improved. Implications and recommendations for reading motivation. Limit the number of worksheets, workbooks, and isolated skills instruction. Spend more time actively engaged in authentic reading. Allow students choices of reading material, reading alone or with someone, who to read with, and where to read. Also provide time for student discourse. Provide a wide variety of reading material. Assist students with finding books that are at an appropriate text level. Provide time for students to actually read books of choice. Use book clubs for skills instruction and comprehension during small group instruction. For future research, quantitative studies on fluency and accuracy with increased student choice and increased time for independent reading would be a recommendation. And comprehension using book clubs would also be another recommendation. Donalyn Miller says in her book, The Book Whisperer, since making independent reading the core of the reading program in my classroom, I have witnessed an increase in student achievement as well as a sharp increase in student motivation and engagement. Even if traditional instruction were able to provide equivalent gains, the improvement in students' attitudes toward reading would be cause enough to devote substantial time to independent reading.